Hello and welcome to today's tutorial. Today promises to be so fascinating. Why? We're going to discuss the multiple layers epithelia. What are they called? These tissues are called the stratified epithelial tissue. In today's tutorial, we're going to discuss a lot of things. We're going to tell you what these tissues are. We're going to tell you where you can find them. We're also going to tell you what they do, which function they provide at those particular body parts. So if you are new, you don't have any idea about epithelial tissue, definitely you are at the right place. Witness this tutorial to the end. So in chronological order, first, we're going to discuss the stratified squamous epithelia. Next, we're going to look at the stratified cuboidal epithelia. And thirdly, we're going to look at the stratified columnar epithelia. For each of these epithelia, as I stated, don't forget, I'm going to tell you what it is. I'm going to tell you where you can find it. And I'm lastly going to tell you which function it provides for that particular body part. So let's move on. So let's get started with the stratified squamous epithelium. In discussing this, we start with our first questions, right? Which is, what is this epithelial tissue? What is it? In a simplified definition, it is a tissue that is made of more than one layer of cells, and these cells are either or they are squamous in shape. From the image here, you see it gives you a vivid description of what we are talking about here. The cells here are flat or squamous in shape. But you notice that these cells, they form more than one layer. So a tissue that has this particular form is what we refer to as the stratified squamous epithelium. Another thing you have to consider about this tissue is the deeper layers might be made of either cuboidal or columnar cell. Remember in our last tutorial, we said that the tissue carries the name of the cells that are formed at the surface. So it's possible that beneath the cells at the surface, we might have different types of or different cells that have different shape. Meaning we might have cuboidal cells or columnar cells beneath here. But once we have the squamosal cells at the top, we consider this particular tissue as a stratified squamous epithelium. Hope that is very clear. Next, these tissues, they have subtypes, as you can see here. And this subtype is actually based on the presence of a protein that is known as the keratin protein. So in tissues that have the keratin protein, we refer to this tissue as being the keratinized stratified squamous tissue. Whereas the ones that do not have, we call them the non-keratinized stratified squamous tissue. Where are these found? The keratinized squamous or stratified squamous tissues, they form the outer covering of our body. That's the epidermis. So when you look at your body, what you see there is this keratinized stratified squamous tissue. When it comes to the non-keratinized form, you'll find it lining the mouth, the esophagus, and the vagina. Those are places you find the non-keratinized epithelial or stratified squamous tissue. Lastly, like I said, what do? These cells, from their position, they provide protective covering for the underlying tissue. So when you look at your body or you look at your hand, you notice that your skin is providing a level of protection for the tissues that are on the right. That's the stratified squamous tissue. The keratin has from providing that particular function. Also, you look at the esophagus. Mind you, you always have food being passed through that particular area. So to provide or protect the underlying tissue or structures there, you have stratified squamous lining the esophagus. Similar thing applied to all of the other parts that you find these various tissues. Let's move on now and look at the next class of stratified squamous tissue. The next class is the stratified cuboidal epithelial tissue. Like I said, we're going to be very much in this straight to the point. So what is it? It is more than one layer from the cell name here stratified. It is more than one layer, but the cells that make up this tissue, they have cube shape. So that's why we call them cuboidal epithelium. And this type of epithelium is very rare. Yeah, it's important that I point this out. Meaning you hardly find it. Rather, there are many located in adult sweat glands, also in some ducts of the esophagus, and for certain parts of the male urethra. So you see, very much in the limited areas you find these types of tissue. However, they're still important, so we have to discuss them. Next, what do? They provide protection and also provide limited secretion, very low secretion and absorption function. Those are some basic information about the stratified cuboidal epithelia. Next, we'll look at the last step of stratified epithelium, which is the stratified columnar epithelium. The stratified columnar epithelium, like other types of epithelium, is made of more than one layer of cells, and the cell shapes are columnar. This is also somehow rare. However, they are found on the lining of the urethra. They also form lining large secretory or excretory ducts of glands like the esophagus. They also have small areas in the anal mucosa membrane and part of the conjunctiva of the eye. Those are places you find it. Mind you, I'm just giving you some areas that you can find this tissue, right? So for testing yourself, you can go on to ask yourself or find out where are other areas you can find the different types of columnar epithelial tissue. But it is by being able to recognize where these cells are from that if even they are diseased or you have cancer, or so you'll be able to locate or detect where they are from. So it's important that you do that for yourself. Lastly, for protection of a function, these guys they provide protection for whatever part of the body they are covering, and they might also be involved in secretion. Let's move on. So let's now look at the other forms of epithelial tissue, right? Those were the stratified. Well, what we're looking at now is something termed as the pseudostratified columnar epithelium. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break down this entire name and just show you how the name actually reflects the type of tissue we're discussing here. The first syllable here, pseudo, it means false. False, not genuine, right? And stratify mean more than one layer, as we've been discussing. Columnar tells us that the cells are in column shape. So this tissue, when you combine this, or when you combine each of these various syllables that make up the name of this tissue, you know that these are tissue that are not stratified, but they appear stratified, meaning they provide false impression of stratification. If you observe them, as we can see here, you will think based on the level of their nucleus that this tissue have cells that are arranged in more than one layer. But in actuality, these cells, they are simple cells. So that's why we call them the pseudo-stratified columnar cells. Also, one thing is all of the cells originate from the basal membrane, just that all of them do not reach at the top. So some of the cells, if you can see here, start from the basement membrane, but they terminate at the middle of the tissue. Only a few cells reach at the top, if I may say, in some tissue, right? So as I stated, the nuclei lie at different levels, so you might think they are stratified. And these cells, they might also have goblet cells. meaning those are cells usually that have secretory activities and they are located within this very epithelial tissue to help them carry out secretory functions for the ones that have those properties. When you look here, they may have cilia at their surface, and from our previous tutorial, we know that the cilia, based on their location, they will help in the movement of substances along the membrane of that particular locus. Where are they from? For the ciliated ones, meaning the ones that have cilia, we found them lining the trachea and most part of the upper respiratory tract or upper respiratory system. Sorry, so you find most of them lining there and they help in the movement of substances along the respiratory tract, right? The next is the non-ciliated ones. You will usually find them lining the ducts of the male reproductive tube. That's just simple and easy to understand. Let's move on now. Alright, so continuing our tutorial, let's look at what the pseudostratified columnar epithelial tissue do. They usually have secretory function as I stated because of the presence of goblet cells they have. Next, they have the capacity to carry out proportion of mucus, usually through their cilia, as I also stated earlier. So let's move now to the next type of tissue. Remember, in our previous tutorial, I said that these are irregular tissue, meaning they don't follow the regular pattern of naming tissue. So let's move on to the next one. The next one here is the transitional epithelial tissue. So what are they? These are cells, basal cells usually that have cuboidal or columnar shape. The superficial cells, as we can see here, the cells at the surface of the transitional epithelia, they have dome shape. But the basal cell or the cells that are beneath might either have cuboidal or columnar shape, transitional epithelium. This this tissue is usually found in the ureters, also the urinary bladder and part of the urethra. For the function, they have the capacity to stretch and also allow distension of the body. Somehow, someone will say the transition from one form of tissue to the other as they go on or carrying out their function. So thank you very much for witnessing this tutorial. We hope it was very much indeed helpful and refreshing. Yes, I hope to be back here next week, same time with another tutorial. Don't forget, if you've not yet subscribed, please subscribe to this channel and like our tutorials. You can also share to friends that might be interested in content of such. Thank you very much.